Welcome back, everyone. This will be our first lesson in the building our automation framework chapter. At this point, we've already gone through Playwright fundamentals. We now know what a Playwright object is. We know how to instantiate browsers, how to work with browser context. We know what pages are. We've discussed about selectors, the different type of selectors that we can use, what is a locator and the various actions we can perform on it. We also discussed about the assertions library that comes with Playwright. So we are going to use the base that we've already built and start to work on our automation framework. Now at this point we should have two tests. First one called first test and the second one is called sign up test. Now if we look at the beginning of our tests, we can already see that we have some common code used in both of them. So we need to initialize a Playwright object, instantiate our browser, then create a browser context, and from this context we create a page. Now this is all code that can live in another class, a common class that can be used by both of our tests and all further tests that we are going to develop. A good way of moving this code will be to create a new class, and I'm going to do that right now, and I'm going to call this class Playwright Runner. Okay, and I'm going to make both of our existing tests to extend this new class. So both the first test and the sign up test is going to extend our Playwright Runner. Perfect. Now let's move this common code to a method here in our new Playwright Runner. We'll call this method, let's call it setup. We will move this common code over there. And I'm going to delete it from the second test. Now, at this point, this code over here is not called anywhere. And we see that we have some errors in our existing tests, meaning that they do not know of this page object over here. So I'm going to declare it at class level. I'm going to make it protected. And for now, I'm going to call it page, have it over here. And in order to be initialized in our setup, I'm going to remove this local variable declaration. So when this code will be executed, our page over here will be initialized, and then our test will call the correct instance. We still have an issue right now that this method is not called at all. So one way of calling this will be either to call it from our test directly, but since we are writing tests over here, and what I would want to have is have my browser launch before or when my test actually starts, I guess a good way of doing this is to actually use a before each annotation from JUnit 5, meaning this code, this setup will be called for each test that I have before it actually starts the execution of the actual test. So that code will be invoked, and then it will go on and use and execute all the code in the test. And one extra item that maybe we should have is actually close the browser and the browser context in and after each method. So let's create a new method. I'm not returning anything, so it will be a void. And let's call this one tier down. And here I'm going to close the browser and the browser context. First I'm going to close the context, but I also need to declare these two over here so I have access to them. Browser context, and then which one, and then the browser. Remove the local variables, okay, and call the browser context.close and the browser.close in my tier down, and use the after each annotation for this. Okay, perfect. So if I have multiple tests in my test class, like let's say I have multiple tests over here, not only one, maybe it makes sense to have the browser instantiated for each test, but I don't believe that the Playwright object should be initialized for each of our tests. So maybe I can call it only one time per class. So let's also move the Playwright as a at the class level, delete the local instantiation over here, and create a class that will be executed before all tests. So if we are going to use the before all annotation from JUnit, this will actually only be called from a static context. So I need to make two changes. Let's call the method public static void, so it needs to be static. And then also let's give it the name of init. Move this over here, and then also I need to make the Playwright static, because you cannot call it from a static context if it's not also static. Okay, this seems a little bit better. So all that's left to do now is actually try to run one of our tests. So let's go with the sign up test. Now if you remember from our assertions lesson, we actually introduced here an expected text that will fail. So I'm going to correct it so our entire test will pass. Let's also delete this system out because we won't need it, and let's give it a try. And my expectation would be that our test will run successfully after the changes that we've done. And the difference now is that our test will actually use a runner. All our tests will use a runner. Perfect. So our test has gone through successfully, and I'm expecting that the first test will also run successfully. Okay guys, this was all for this lesson.